Welcome, Shannon. It's just a joy to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Russ. I love this group so much. Every time I see Russ and Olivia at an event, I get so excited because it's such an honor to be here. So thank you for having me. And maybe some of you I met last year when we did this event for Feminist Prayers for my daughter. But if we have not Zoom met yet, then hi. And it's just a delight to be here. Like you said, I'm Shannon. I live in Iowa with my family, and we are in Ames, so about 45 minutes from Des Moines, the capital. And yeah, so I wrote this book, The Mystics Would Like a Word, and I'm a writer, so I am kind of always thinking, what's the next book? What's the next book? But while I was writing some of the other ones for myself, I was diving into mystics, the female mystics for like my own prayer life. And I didn't necessarily think or plan to write a book about them, but it was like more something that I was kind of doing to just feed my own soul. But I think what really turned the corner for me was when I read Mirabai Starr's book, Wild Mercy. I don't know if I have any Mirabai Starr fellow fangirls or boys or people in here, but I love Mirabai Starr so much. And so I read Wild Mercy, and in that book, she talks about female mystics from a lot of different religious traditions. And I was sort of at a point where I was most interested in other people I hadn't heard of yet. It's like, tell me some news stories. Like, I know Teresa of Ávila, like, I know, I'm Catholic, I promise I know. But I found it so refreshing, actually, to see what she said as an ethnically Jewish woman who, oh, yes, Wild Mercy. Russ, could you put that in the chat? Wild Mercy by Mirabai Starr, thanks. An ethnically Jewish woman who is sort of more I guess people would describe her as like a new age spirituality writer. But she's just she is a translator of the mystics, especially Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross. She has a translation of Julian of Norwich's showings, and she's a brilliant woman. And so I found it fascinating and really refreshing to see from an entirely different viewpoint how someone interpreted the life of some of these saints that we in the Catholic Church know really well, but we know only the way that they have been presented to us and from tradition, which is very, heteronormative male, mostly white European men in power. And so it was incredible for me. It was really life-changing, and it just whet my appetite for more. And so I had already kind of begun, and that was why I ordered the book, but then I was just all in, and I was like, tell me more, like, who else can I find out about? And so I think that is that's really how the book came to be and was inspired, because I saw this, but I also knew that most Catholic women my age were not reading this. Like, they didn't know, Mirabai Starr existed. She's not in their realm of consciousness. So I was like, I want to write something for Catholic and just general Christian Protestant women, elevating the voices of these women through the lens of a woman, through the eyes of a woman. And because I think that we see some things that these, male theologians haven't seen. And so that was it kind of became just a passion project. And I fell in love with them, and I really hope that readers do as well. And I think that one of the most encouraging things to come from having written the book is that I've gotten a lot of feedback from readers who have said, this book gives me hope that I can stay in the Catholic Church, or this book gives me hope that I can stay Christian, because these women prove that it's a much wider pool than we think. And I mean, you guys know, you've been doing this a long time, you know, this is exactly what FutureChurch does, but so many people get stuck in a very narrow container for Catholicism, and they don't really even know that there's more out there. And that was me for a long time. So that was the driving force. The book is part, I wouldn't say it's part memoir, but it's a lot of my personal stories and a lot of my own personal journey, starting from, I mean, it's not as chronological, but there are things that trace back to my college years and then, you know, through adulthood. So, because those are the things that I like to read. I like to know a little bit about the author that I'm reading. So there's a lot of, you know, biography of each mystic. And then there's also some of my story, because what I'm trying to do is show the relevance of what these women wrote and our lives today in 2025. And speaking of 2025, I think this is the perfect time in history to be seeking out these women's voices, because we're in for it for the next 4 years. I think we all know that. It's going to be a long haul. And so really kind of finding teachers and guides to anchor us, whether they're living or whether they're dead. And I think that these women are excellent guides for this particular time in history. And I'm going to explain a little bit about how the themes that I chose for each one. So the women that I chose to focus on, it was so hard to narrow down because there's obviously so many incredible female voices out there. And it's like, who am I to say who's a mystic and who's not a mystic, obviously. But so basically I gave myself a really narrow definition of how to narrow this down, how to choose. And I was like, I wanted it to be women who had written at least one whole book on their own, in their own voice, in their own words. And of course, naturally, that immediately eliminates most of human history, especially for females. But that was really important to me, because I was like, I don't want to be told about them or about their lives. That there's value in that. But for this project, I needed to hear from the women themselves. And so that was one standard that I held. And another one was women who are more or less universally recognized as mystics, you know, ones that weren't a big reach for me to be labeling them so or whatnot. Most of the women in the books are canonized saints, but Julian of Norwich actually is not. A lot of Catholics don't even know that, but she's not. And Margery Kempe is another one that I included. And she's probably the least known of all the women, but I think that she's my favorite. So I'm excited to get to tell you a little bit about her in a second. But so yeah, the ones that I ended up narrowing it down to were Teresa of Ávila, Margery Kempe, Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich, Therese of Lisieux, and Catherine of Siena. And it's kind of funny because for most of those women, if you want to read anything about them, there are, like, you can throw a rock in a Catholic bookstore. You can throw like a raisin in a Catholic bookstore and hit a book about any of these women or most of these women. But I really wanted it to be not just like what I said about, you know, a lens for modern women and amplifying the female experience and their voices, but also I am a progressive thinker, you know, I am like a lefty Catholic, and I'm like, I feel like the right wing has sort of like confiscated all the saints, and you know, it's like we have to like fight to reclaim, like, no, actually they are not this thing that you're reducing to. And you know, obviously there are exceptions, and there's some middle ground everywhere, of course, and not everybody does that, but it is a problem, I would say. And I really want to bring the wisdom and the treasure that these women have to people who assume that they're not for them. And I did write this book for women. And I will say, I really hope and very much appreciate when people who do not identify as women also read the book. because I think that, for one, I think that we can all learn from, and should all learn from, the voices and experience and certainly spiritual teachings of wise women who are worthy of study. But then also, it's, if you're not a female identifying person, this book is very helpful in understanding people who are living that reality right now. And so that's also kind of just a tangent, but so yes, I kind of assume as the author of the book, as I'm talking, that I'm talking to women, but don't feel excluded if you're not a woman, because I still would love for you to read and tell me what you think and get something out of it, hopefully. Okay, so before we do a Q&A, I wanted to go through sort of, I know you guys are going to do a book study, a book group, and I'm so excited that Russ chose this book for that, because that was one of my hopes in writing it, was that that book clubs really would kind of gather and chew on these things together, because not only are the women themselves worth studying, but the topics of the chapters are things that are immediately personal to many of our lives today. And so it really does facilitate deep conversation and a lot of honesty and vulnerability and self-examination, and hopefully develop some empathy as we, discuss our own experiences of the topics or themes. So let me drink some water, because I can go a mile a minute, but we're going to start with Teresa of Avila. So the way I broke it down was that each woman got 2 chapters devoted just to her, and each of those 2 chapters would tackle a different topic. So Teresa of Avila, the opening chapter of the book is on trusting yourself. And actually, it's funny, I don't have a physical copy of the book. I was like, I should be like holding up so you could see the cover, so you could identify the book. But I gave them all away. I'm like a shameless. I'm like, oh, you don't have money to buy it? Here, I have some. Like, here, just take it. So I gave them all away at this point. But the first one that, oh, Max is holding it up. Thanks. There it is. They're getting their word in. Yeah, I liked the title too, because it's a little bit snarky and sassy, and I feel like these women would approve of that. So thanks, Max. Teresa of Avila, I chose to open the book with her because of her writing in The Interior Castle. The Interior Castle was the first book of, well, is that correct? I think I might have read something else first, but it's one of the first books that I read in this whole season of my life, where I'm really just like diving into the mystics. And The Interior Castle blew my mind, because I couldn't believe that so long ago, this woman was teaching that, like, that God is in here. Like, you don't have to go looking for God out here. And most of you probably recognize that, like, Jesus also said that and taught that, but we tend to, that tends to get a little watered down in the Catholic Church, because, people in power need to stay in power. So, but like, I was just so encouraged, and to see not only her saying this, but also, I mean, I understood why this woman is one of the most beloved mystics of any religious traditions, and why people of all faiths or no faith specifically read her work, because she's a prayer master. Like, she's talking about, if you're not familiar with Interior Castle, she identifies these different mansions, what she calls them, like sort of different stages in your active relationship. Hi, Daryl Grigsby. I'm so sorry, you guys. I have ADHD and I get really distracted by comments, but that just made my day, because he writes for NCR and he's so cool. Hi. So the Interior Castle, just, yeah. So, okay, mansions, hi, ADHD. The mansions, the going further and further into ourselves leads us further and further into God. And I think for a lot of us, we are kind of scared to trust that is so, because it seems like self-centered, or like, what if we get off? And of course, there's all kinds of checks and balances. Like, we need community, we need each other, we need scripture, tradition, but also our own experience of God is so important. And too often we're not taught how to cultivate that. We kind of just rely on going to mass, or, you know, learning the prayers or whatnot. And so she just provides this path to show us what it means to follow the Holy Spirit that's living and active inside of us. And, you know, Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is not out there, you're out looking for it, like it is within you. And I feel like that just sums up so beautifully what Teresa of Avila communicates. And then in my second book, or my second chapter related to Teresa, I wrote about sexuality and spirituality, and the connection between those things. And I found that to be a really fascinating study with a celibate nun in mind. But like, if you know anything about Teresa of Avila's life, you probably know that she, before entering the convent, she was pretty spicy. Like, we don't know all the details, but like, she liked flirting, she liked her like social life, and you know, she really liked attention, she liked men. And so something happened, we don't know what, like that was like considered taboo with a person of the opposite sex, and she, you know, got her hand smacked and got sent off to the convent so the nuns could get her back in line. And then she was supposed to, you know, come back home and get married and settle down and have a lot of babies, and that's what everybody expected. But it turned out like she loved it. She loved the life of a religious, and she wanted to pursue that. And so I kind of explore this connection between this, I don't know if anybody reads Esther Perel, but I'm a big fan of her work. And she talks about eroticism as being more than sexuality. It is a sense of aliveness, of vitality. And it's sort of this feeling of the energy of being alive, of joy. And I think that that's such a parallel to a vibrant spiritual life, because the people like Teresa of Avila that we look to and learn from, there's like so much vitality, there's so much eroticism, if you will, of like just like a life full. And so we also talk about sensuality, and what does that mean to be a person who lives in your body, in your experiences, in your senses. And so that was a really fun chapter to explore, because I think it kind of plays with a lot of unexpected pieces. And, you know, if you aren't for sure, yes, I think that's basically it. Esther Perel, yeah. Yeah, so I love that, the unexpectedness of Teresa's sexuality, and how she ultimately learned to channel it into a very intimate, very dynamic prayer life, a relationship with God, and in community. And part of that community was certainly the women that she lived with, and part of the community was St. John of the Cross. And so I spend a little bit of time talking about their relationship and that aliveness energy that they shared together that brought them both deeper and deeper into the heart of God. And I think it's really a model for us in so many ways as we kind of navigate right now. Like, what does it look like to be a sexual person in 2025? And you know, some of us being celibate, some of us being married, some of us not. And I think that taking sort of the textbook definition of that away and really looking at like, what does it mean to be a person who is fully alive? I think that's a really interesting conversation, and she brought so much to it. My dog is saying hi to you guys. So we're moving. I'm taking way too long. They're not all going to get that much time. I'm sorry, ladies. We're moving though. Margery Kempe I just like, I love her because she's the only mom out of these 6 women. And so she's the only one who is married and has children. She not only has children, but she has 14 children. And so we read, she's actually the first memoirist, and she lived in England in the Middle Ages, and she wrote her story, essentially her life story. And we see in her own words, like non-consensual sex within marriage. We see her asking for a vow of chastity with her husband. And we see her deteriorate from, my dog. We see her deteriorate from postpartum depression, even probably postpartum psychosis. Oh my gosh. She's a puppy. She's only like 9 months old. She gets a free pass. So with these heartbreaking things that like no one has talked about, and Margery, I think more than anybody, just shocked and grieved me by how misunderstood her story has been. Because if you know anything about her, or if you Google her, surely some of the things that will come up have to do with her mental health and how she, may or may not have been mentally ill. And that leads into the other chapter that I wrote about her. But there's so much there that was missed with the lack of body autonomy that she experienced, the deteriorating mental health that came from, not having a choice about how many children she would bear. But the beautiful thing about Margery, and what I find so inspiring about her, is that there came a point where she was just like, no, I'm doing this. And she took, she finally got her husband to take the vow of chastity, and then she skipped town and like left her 14 kids with him and her mother, who was there, and I'm sure they had nannies and everything. But she went on pilgrimage for 3 years on a spiritual quest, and she dressed all in white. And so I talk in this chapter about reclaiming virginity, because what does it mean archetypally? It means to belong to yourself, to be self-determining, and to not belong to another person, particularly a man. And so anyways, her pilgrimage, her adventure, it's a beautiful story, and she has so much goodness. And then my other chapter on her was about mental health and the relationship that we have historically seen between interesting expressions of like biblical prophets, of like prophets throughout history that we revere, and who kind of seem mentally ill. And I speak as someone who has depression and anxiety and ADHD, like I'm not stigmatizing, but it's like, well, that's interesting that we have no problem with like John the Baptist eating locusts and like wearing animal fur and like living in the wilderness alone. We can just be like, oh, that's quirky, but like he is definitely a prophet. And then today, people like that are stigmatized, even if they have very valuable things to bring into the church. And so kind of just calling for calling us to take that seriously, calling us to take the role of the prophet in the modern church seriously, and realize that a lot of times that prophetic voice comes from a population that struggles like with mental health. And I think those things go together because it's so wrapped up in sensitivity to the world, of having that antenna that is so tuned that sometimes the world really is too much, but there's so much value there to speak truth about what they're seeing. So that's Margery. Hildegard, I devoted one chapter to creativity and art making, specifically like why we give it time, like why. I think I titled it, "The World is Burning, Why Make Art?" So kind of like, is it a worthwhile pursuit? Is it only for the professionals, the people who have XYZ, after their name, or have studied at such and such institute? And obviously my answer and Hildegard's answer would be no, like it is a spiritual pursuit in and of itself. creativity and the human ability to make art is in itself an expression of God, is an expression of the divine. It is, I think the mystics would say, like, it is oneness with God, and also that it's action, that it is not nothing in a day and age where we feel a lot of need for action, but we think about, we tend to think about action as, you know, like community gathering, going to protest, organizing, you know, rallying votes, like all of those things, and that action is so important. But then also, you know, just think about like the music you listen to, or the shows that you watch, or the movies that you watch right now, like that is art that speaks so much to what is needed at this moment in time, what we're going through as humans, and it unites us. And but most of us will never direct an Oscar-winning movie, right? But the fact that it matters, if you're the only person who sees it, or if 100 people see it, or 100,000 people see it, like it puts something of God into the world, and equally as important, it unites you to God in the unique way that you have been made. And so I find Hildegard really inspiring in that way, because she did a little bit of everything, you know, scientifically, art-wise, music. She even wrote plays. I found that out. I didn't know that. So it is a worthwhile pursuit. The other chapter on Hildegard that I did was obviously on eco-spirituality and finding God in the earth, and protecting the earth because it is of God. It is of God. And so I'm going to have to keep zooming, but those are good chapters. I'm doing my best, guys. I'm staying focused. Julian of Norwich was, I think she was actually the first of these mystics that I ever read. And I just fell in love from the very beginning when she talks about the hazelnut. And if you're familiar with her work, then you probably know what I'm talking about. But for the purposes of this book, I went for it, you guys. I did a whole chapter on questioning what we think we know about hell and sin, because I was like, I am a conflict avoidant person. I didn't love that, because I'm like, I'm opening myself up to all kinds of debate, but it would be doing her a severe disservice if I didn't, because the things that she saw in her visions, for instance, her kind of saying, I never saw sin, like sin did not exist, only except for the harm that it does. Like these thoughts of, she experienced God in her visions to be so much bigger and deeper and merciful, and in sin and hell became nothing in the face of that love. And I just thought that is so important and so revolutionary for her day. Like I have to put it in. And so we did a whole chapter on that. And then the other chapter with her is on the divine feminine, because she was one who spoke, or who wrote, excuse me, about God as mother, because she had this series of visions that she called the showings, and she saw Jesus as mother, and she kind of had this revelation of the motherhood of God, the birthing of humanity, redemption, these things that come from a feminine God. And again, it was just another thing that I was like, how is no one talking about this? How are we just ignoring and pretending like this isn't written and available to us, you know? And I mean, I'm a little biased because this issue is very important to me, but I kind of think that maybe that's why she hasn't been canonized, is because like she's too controversial, even though like people love the idea of her. They love this like anchoress who like devoted her life in a cell, because they're like, keep the woman in the cell. But turns out she wrote a book that we found hundreds of years later. Anyways, she's great. She's amazing. She's a firecracker, and you should definitely read her work. And Mirabai Starr has a translation of that book, and that's definitely the translation that I would recommend. She's just, the way that the choices she makes about the words that she uses is very intentional, and she explains that in the introduction. And so she actually takes out a lot of the words that can be kind of triggering, that were common then, but now for some of us, a lot of us on the Zoom call might like not be comfortable words to use. And so I'm not talking about like anything like horrible. It's just like, I'm saying I appreciate those choices. Okay, we have 2 more ladies, and we're going to do this in 10 minutes. And my dog is going to bite my hand off, but we're going to get through it. Therese of Lisieux. I wrote one chapter on her as the anti-influencer, because she, hold on, I found my dog's toy. Because you're probably familiar, she wrote about smallness, and she wrote what she calls the little way. And oh my God, I'm sorry. Hold on, I have to get his toy. Oh. I don't know if that worked, but so she wrote about, basically, she wrote against everything that many of us hear about life. Like that you have to be building something bigger, that it has to be more, that you have to be, you know, whether it's like moms need to have a side hustle, like that's a thing, you know, for moms on the internet, or just like whatever it is you're doing isn't big enough, and you have to grow and expand and influence a lot of people. And even as a writer, I see that with other writers. And maybe some of you see it in your own crafts as well, of just, it doesn't count unless a lot of people see it. And so I love Therese's just resistance against that, even though I will admit she is hard to stomach sometimes, because she's so sweet and syrupy and demure and all of that, but we love her anyway. She gets her spot in this book anyway, because she has a lot of wisdom, and died at a young age. And I'm always like, man, I wish that she had lived longer so that we could see how that brain evolved, because I would have wanted to hear what she had to say when she was 75, but we didn't get to. Maybe one day in heaven we'll get to. She also, little known fact that has also been kept hidden pretty well, that she wanted to be a priest, and she felt a calling to be a priest. And that was a big part of her story. She also wanted to be a missionary overseas. She had big dreams, and didn't get to fulfill them because of ill health, and well, obviously because she was a female, she couldn't be a priest. But that, I think that makes her teachings on smallness much more powerful. It's not coming from somebody who didn't have the desire for that. It's coming from somebody who really did. And that kind of brings us to her second chapter, which was on the mother wound. And this was a really fun discovery for me to make, because she was one that I was very familiar with. She's actually my patron saint. I chose her as my patron saint. I converted when I was 30. So I chose her as my patron saint because she was so different from me that I knew I needed her. And so all that to say, I was very familiar with her story, and I had read Story of a Soul and, you know, all of that. But when I went back and read it as now a 40-year-old woman, I had 10 more years of experience, and I was like, oh my gosh, like all of this, the place of revelation that she became a doctor of the church. You know, she's only one of only 4 women to be a doctor of the church. This revelation of littleness and being held by God, and her little way that she called it. She only was able to come to that and make this contribution to the church because she it came from the place of her deepest hurt, her deepest pain, which was losing her mother as a very young child. And once I saw that, it was like, she writes things about her older sister and how her older sister would be her mother. Like she said that when she was young. Well, I almost missed it, but her older sister was actually the mother prioress of the convent that she entered. And so, like, literally, her big sister became her surrogate mother. And it made so much sense to me that she would seek out a community of older women, that she would like have this encounter with God, like in the place of her need. She needed to be held like a little child because she didn't get that from her mother. And she never recognized God as mother the way that Julian of Norwich did, but the way that she relates to God is in essence very maternal, and she positions herself kind of as a child in a mother's arms. And so I thought that was just such a fascinating, and I love that example of like, we think we know someone's story and like we think that it's not that relevant or that, you know, it's not that interesting, and then like you read it a second time or a third time in their own words instead of how someone explains them to you, and you find these little jewels. And so that was one of the best surprises for me. The last one, Catherine of Siena, and one chapter I chose before I actually read her own words. I chose a chapter about balancing action and contemplation, because I was like, well, she's a mystic and she was like a woman of crazy action. Like she got stuff done. So like, surely she'll be the perfect person to teach us. Well, it turns out she was the perfect person to teach us because she really failed at it. She burnt herself out. She died too young. She was very ill. She just went too hard with no rest. And I think coming into this next 4 years, she's someone that we really should ask to pray for us, because we're going to really need a lot of rest and a lot of renewal, and to be spiritually fed and not just to always be trying to accomplish action. So that was another surprise in my writing process. And then the last chapter of the book is on her, and it's about horror, gore, and facing our shadow. And I wrote that actually because that was the last chapter I had left to write the book. I thought I wanted to write it about death, but I wasn't sure what. And then I got septic shock and almost died and was in the ICU for a long time, for days. And I suddenly was like, well, I think I know what I'm going to write about. So I really used her experience with like the sort of the horror of being human and the fear that we have and what to do with this fear. And I think as Catholics, it's really interesting because we have this great tradition that really prioritizes like weirdo stuff. Like we got relics, we got stories about people getting their eyeballs gouged out and, you know, like beheaded. But like, what is the point of all of that? Like, what is it telling us and why does it matter? And so I really had fun with that chapter to kind of let the gore and the horrifying nature of being human really like guide us to something. And what I found was really that when we look into our shadow places, when we look into our fears, it has a lot to teach us. And if we don't run away, and if we can kind of find the wherewithal to stay instead of to run from it. And I think Catherine of Siena, in her life, she does such a beautiful job of that in a lot of different ways. And I learned from it in my own experience, and I really took her with me as I processed that journey for myself. So I did it. I made it through. That is my summary of the 12 chapters. And I would love to hear y'all's questions, and I would love to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Shannon, for sharing. And as everyone is getting ready to pose their questions, I do have a very easy one for you.
Okay.
What is your dog's name?
Oh my gosh. Butterscotch.
Oh, okay.
Butterscotch was, we got her because she was going to be a service dog for my son who has debilitating anxiety. And she is just a pain in the butt. She's not serving anything. So she's just now a family dog. But the good news is that he loves her and they snuggle and that's fine. And so it's not nothing. It's helpful, but it's not exactly, when you have 5 kids and you bring in a dog, it really has to be a good reason, but here she is.
Sure. Well, Butterscotch is still young, so there's still some
Yes,
some
she'll get
learning to
better.
do. So, all right. Well, it looks like Megan St. Marie has a question. So, Megan, I'm going to bring you up on the screen, and you'll just have to unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this presentation and for this book. I mean, it's just wonderful. And I wish I could ask you like a million questions and, I'll look into your retreats. That's what I'll say. But I really want to talk or hear you to speak a little more about Therese de Lisieux because in 2023, I brought my dad on a heritage trip to France. And by coincidence or divine intervention, we ended up at her basilica on the centenary of her beatification, which was just amazing. And we did a tour, and one thing we learned about was how she became so famous, particularly in the Francophone world, because she was photographed, and that her sister had a camera and photographed her. And so her image was all over the world. And my dad, when he's 87, one of his first memories was of seeing her picture in his little Franco-American household and up on his mother's dresser. And my grandmother had this great devotion to her. And so that's why we're there. It was just amazing. But I was therefore really intrigued that you called her the anti-influencer, because when I went on this tour, I was like, oh, she was like the original influencer. And
Yeah.
I just wonder if you could speak to anything you might know about or how you wrestled with that, because I'm sure you've seen the photographs and you know about how her image was everywhere, and how maybe you can speak to that tension.
Yes. So I think that the spirit of it is not the result, but the intention. Like she really, like I said, she did have these big dreams and she did want to make an impact. And I think she probably is tickled pink by how much influence she actually ended up having. But like the way that she found a meaningful relationship with God and the way that she found meaning for herself in her own life, and like sort of like an inner satisfaction, I guess, of like that was through this revelation of smallness and I want to say almost insignificance, of like knowing that what mattered to her was Jesus. What mattered to her was simply loving the people that she lived with. And like she had a very small world and a very small life. But I think maybe what resonates so much with people is she did really have like a very small, simple life, and in some ways it's almost like a saint that we can see ourselves in, even though she's like kind of perfect. It's like annoying, but like because she didn't do anything incredible, she just lived a very normal life, so I think that's almost why so many people can gravitate towards her, because it is like she like takes out all of the pretense, and she's like I just want to be a child on your lap. God, I just want to feel loved by you. Would you just let me feel loved by you, God? And that's enough, So, but that's fascinating about the photography aspect. I actually hadn't heard that or made that connection. So that's really, I mean, I obviously have seen the photos and, it's really prolific, but even of her as a little girl. So yeah, that's very cool. Thank you. I'm jealous of your trip too.
Great, thanks, Megan. So Shannon, there are a couple questions that came up into the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and read those for everyone.
Yeah.
If anyone would like to ask a question on screen, you're more than welcome to. Just use that react button that's down at the bottom. You'll hit that, and then you'll see a little option to raise hand, and then that's how I'll know that you would like to ask a question. So the first question comes from NS, and they're asking, what book would you recommend for further reading about Catherine of Siena?
Ooh, Sigrid Undset actually has a biography of her that's really good. I would recommend that one.
Great. Max asks, say that a couple times quickly, were there any other women mystics that you considered but just didn't have space for?
Yes. It's a long
Plenty,
list.
right?
Yeah. Yes. Gosh.
Maybe who's the one you most regret not having space for?
I mean, honestly, I don't know any of the rest of them well enough to have regrets. But one thing that made me sad about it was that like there was not a lot of diversity in, and I wish that there had been, but that went back to like I would have loved to have, you know, female mystics from like every continent or something. I think that would have been in some ways like I won't say a more interesting read, but it would have been a better representation of human history for sure and of womanhood. But it went back to like my guidelines at the beginning. I think Claire of Assisi is probably the one who came closest and got nixed.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, that's a cool idea from a representation from different continents.
Yeah.
Also, as you were talking, I was thinking, well, representation from different eras or time periods too,
Yeah.
and that's some worked in too. But I'd love to know like who you think the modern day mystics are. That would be really
Oh,
interesting
yeah.
to me.
Yeah. Well, I always think of like poets when people ask me that. I'm always like Joy Harjo or like, you know, oh gosh, I don't know, Toni Morrison or, you know, I don't know, there's so many.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Cool. Thanks, Max, for that question. And thanks, Shannon. Let's bring Daryl up here. Daryl, you've got a question.
Thanks, Russ. And thanks, Shannon Evans. That was excellent. I really appreciate that. And I love the St. Therese portion because I'm a convert also. And the parish I was confirmed in was St. Therese.
Really?
So I appreciate that.
That's cool.
And my question is, and I appreciate your energy around this, it's contagious, which we need that. But what of all the things that you learned from writing this book, what would be the one or two things you think we should take away for our collective sanity for the next 4 years?
It's a good question. Oh man. I think after the results of the presidential election, I thought about Catherine of Siena because I've thought about how my response after 2016, and I was like, oh, I'm ready to go. Oh, I'm just going to do everything. I'm going to like, you know, I'm going to just be the activist that never sleeps, you know? And the difference this time, I really noticed in myself of almost like a resignation. And that scared me, you know, of like, so I've spent some time thinking about it, and I don't think I'm alone. I think I've heard this from others as well, that like, it's almost like there was so much energy and determination in 2016, 2017, that we like in some ways we kind of burned ourselves out, a lot of us. I mean, not everybody, of course, but I think I did. And I'm still kind of trying to figure out now like what that balance is, because I definitely, on the contemplation and action pendulum, I definitely swung to contemplation, and now I'm like, I don't think I can afford to do that for the next 4 years. So what does that look like? Like, how does it look to find a healthy balance between those two, where you get filled up, but you're also moving the pendulum, you're also moving things forward. And I think, like I said, I pray to Catherine of Siena a lot for that, because I see her as, someone who probably now in her eternal perspective might have done some things differently in her life. So I'm like, give me your wisdom. I think that she has a lot to teach us. I think all of these women do have a lot to teach us about that.
Great question, Daryl.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great question, Daryl. Thank you. I'm going to take one from the chat, and I see Bob Close has his hand up, but I'll take one from the chat real quick. Andrea asks, I work with juniors and seniors in an all-girl Catholic school. What mystic or two do you think would be most accessible to them?
Good question. I love that. I know a lot of young people identify with Therese of Lisieux because she was young, because she died very young. But it depends on the person, but if I think Teresa of Ávila, really, I mean, she's funny. She really is funny. And she's like, she has this nice balance between sort of this maternal energy and just like a spiritual guru. I think a lot of girls would be very interested in her early years as a teenager, when she was like a social butterfly and kind of wanted a lot of affirmation from boys, and she's very honest about that. So I think that could be a really fun conversation, and especially kind of seeing like how she channeled that energy or that need, how that evolved over the course of her life.
Cool. Great question, Andrea. Thank you. Let's bring Bob up on the screen here.
Wonderful. I'm delighted. Shannon, we corresponded briefly. You published something from the community of St. Peter, but I was floored when you said you converted, and that's a huge word.
Yes.
2 syllables, but it's a huge word.
Yeah.
And to convert at 30 and to be in the position you are with the National Catholic Reporter right now, that's like jumping off the high board. So I'm wondering, briefly, can you tell us a little bit about what led up to wanting to identify and be at that table, and how you came to be one of the voices at the National Catholic Reporter?
Yeah, actually, my on-ramp to Catholicism was the local Catholic worker that I was a part of. So that just ruined me, I didn't have a chance. I was like, oh, I'm Catholic. So yeah, that's that we were in Texas at the time. So that they're guilty for that. But yeah, no, I mean, it was interesting, because it's like, I grew up in Texas, but not, my family's Baptist. And so like everybody we knew was basically Baptist, and Baylor University is in my hometown. It's a huge Baptist university. I really didn't know that many Catholics. I think I had like one Catholic friend, and her parents always seemed to be like having a lot of fun. And I was like, that's weird. But it was a great intro, but yeah. And so then the Catholic worker, and then we moved, and we moved to Iowa, and I got like a crash course in the rest of the Catholic Church was not all like the Catholic worker, so that was tricky, honestly, to kind of navigate, and it's been like a long, confusing road. And like I also got my feet wet as a writer, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, with like more conservative leaning Catholic publications. And so that was also sort of disorienting, because I was kind of just trying to figure out this thing. So yeah, basically, like I was writing a lot. I guess my on-ramp, because I was writing, I was really up on social media. And so my first job before NCR was working at Franciscan Media doing social media for them. And that was a beautiful experience. And then NCR posted an opening for a social media editor. And I was like, oh, I would love, that would be a dream job. I would love to do it. Like I loved Franciscan, but NCR would be even more exciting for me. So I applied and I got it, but like I would have never gotten the position of editor. It's like I had to work my way up and like gain their trust that I wasn't gonna totally ruin it. But they kept me around. So that's kind of how that happened.
Thanks very much.
We're all very blessed that the NCR kept you around, Shannon.
Thanks.
You are, oops, you are a bright shining light to many of us who, I think, struggle with the same things you struggle with, and often turn to you for some inspiration and hope. One of the things that's going on in the chat here is we've got some names of other saints that people wanted to call out. So we've got Sister Josephine Bakita, Sister Kateri Tekawitha, and Edith Stein, and Sister Benedicta of the Cross. So these are all some other names that folks are tossing out there.
Yes, yeah. I didn't look too much into Edith Stein, but I could have. Again, with Josephine Bakita, I love so much. But they had to have written a book, for me to really draw from, to really get the meat from. So sadly, that was not available to many of them.
Got it. All right, let's see. There's one, well, I think we have time for one more question. And I see Rose has her hand up, so let me go to Rose.
Hi, Shannon.
Hi, Rose.
I was speed reading your book today. So
lovely.
I only got, my favorite is Teresa of Avila. I'm part of the parish that Daryl is part of, and we have often been described as ungovernable.
Oh, lovely.
Something that we're quite proud of, I think.
Yes.
And I don't know what Teresa of Lisieux would think of it, but I think Teresa of Avila would definitely have
yes. Yeah.
But
I'm sure she was called the same.
But I really didn't know really anything about is Margery Kempe, and I really deeply appreciated your treatment of mental illness and how it's really important to try to find ways to incorporate people in positions of leadership in the church. So I wondered if you could expand a little bit, maybe give some examples about how you would envision, especially young adults coming into leadership positions who might have, issues with anxiety or depression. I have a daughter who struggles with that and also takes Zoloft. So, I was like, oh, thank God,
Yeah, I totally take Zoloft. Same.
That's awesome. That's great. It kind of normalizes it, right? When
yeah, for sure.
Put it out there. It's like when you understand that there are other people who struggle with mental health issues, But I would just be really curious to see kind of in your imagination what kinds of positions do you feel like people who kind of struggle with that issue, but have these gifts that you described certainly in yourself and in other people that how do you find those entry points into a Catholic parish?
Yeah. Thank you that's such a thoughtful question. I really appreciate that. I don't know that I could speak to like staff positions necessarily, but things that come to mind as like contributions to the parish body would be things like leading book studies maybe, or on topics that feel relevant to the the community that would identify this way, that might be interested in something like that. But also like studies or conversations that don't necessarily have to do with that topic, but that require someone with a lot of empathy, someone with a lot of sensitivity. Like, I think that those are gifts that often come with like mental health struggles. I also think that there's often a need for conversations about the arts and creativity and culture, and I'm even like movie clubs instead of book clubs, where like you watch like a really a specifically chosen movie, and then like facilitating a conversation around that, kind of engaging this I consider that like a prophetic spirit as well, kind of seeing things, seeing strands of spirituality, seeing pieces of God in things that aren't necessarily labeled religious or Catholic. I think a lot of times that kind of ability to see and to draw out is really present in people for whom living is just a little bit harder, there's just like something, I've just noticed that connection between, I think that those kinds of things would be really valuable. And especially, to Daryl's question about the next 4 years, I mean, gosh, if we could just build more empathy in our churches, that would be a huge win, so kind of thinking along those lines, I think people who would consider themselves in that category would really have a lot to offer in the empathy building space. She's finally settled down. Yeah.
Thanks,
After
Rose.
biting
Great
me for an hour.
question.
Yeah, it's a good question.
All right. Well, Shannon, I just want to thank you so much for again taking some time to be with our Future Church community. We absolutely adore you, and we're always glad to have you.
I love it
So
so
thank you
much. I'm
so
going to try
much.
to catch Daryl's next. So.
Yes. Daryl's is coming up too. We're blessed to have some really great writers right now in the church.